How's it going, guys? It's Kyle with Dirt Bike Channel. This is the Dirt Bike Channel podcast, and today I'm going to call up Lectron, and we're going to talk to Brooks Tomlin. It's going to be an awesome conversation. We're going to talk all things Lectron, so I'm pretty excited about that. If you have not yet subscribed to this podcast, go ahead and do that. Looks like we're getting a lot of downloads on iTunes and on Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play. Obviously, this one might also be going up on YouTube, so you can watch us on YouTube, or you can listen to us in the car, whatever you want to do. But I'm pretty excited today about the conversation we're going to have with Lectron. So I'm just going to see, here's my phone right here. I've got this fancy dancy thing right here, and I'm just going to dial up my friends over here at Lectron.
Lectron, Brooks.
Hey, Brooks. It's Kyle Brotherson here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Cool. Well, I've got my recording software going here, and I think we're ready to go. Are you still okay to chat for a little bit?
Yeah, I'm ready whenever you are. I've got some fun stuff to talk about, I think.
Cool. So just a little bit of an introduction for everybody out there. This is Lectron Fuel Systems. These guys have been around since about 1974. And so longer than I've been around. And I've been kind of playing around with Lectron carburetors for, 4 or 5 years now. I've installed them on probably, 8 of my bikes and maybe 8 or 10 more of my friends' bikes, so I've had them on a lot of different things, and I haven't yet found an application where they didn't work fantastic. So, the company, and I'm going to get into a ton of this with Brooks here, but the company, they advertise and they tout that with their carburetor, you get better fuel atomization, you get better throttle response, you get better fuel economy, and they don't have to be adjusted. They're a simple design. And you can run this carburetor, generally speaking, from sea level up to 10 or 12,000 feet, and they don't need a lot of tuning. Is that how you would characterize it, Brooks?
Yeah, more or less. So I won't say that our carbs never need adjusting. That's kind of a common misconception. We do our best to provide a really good base tune from the factory, but depending on your personal preference, your riding style, your exact bike, your application, for example, if you're going to Glamis sand dunes, or you're going to go put on a snow bike and it's negative 20 degrees, you may need to adjust the carburetor a little bit, but once you get it dialed in that first time, then it's a set and forget deal. So, then you're going to get a better fuel economy, better throttle response, all that sort of thing. But where a lot of the plug and play idea comes from is we do our best to nail the base tune from the factory. Cool.
Yeah. No, thanks for that. Thanks for that clarification. That's very good. That's why we've got you on, because you're the expert. You do this every day. So, and I want to get into a ton more into that. But before we kind of dive into all of those technical things, I just kind of wondered, what's your history with dirt bikes? I mean, I've worked with David and Kevin and yourself here for now several years, and I kind of just want to get a little bit of your background, maybe your background with power sports or dirt bikes, and then kind of how you ended up here at Lectron Fuel Systems.
Yeah, so it goes back in my family pretty good ways. My granddad started us all back off in dirt bikes. He raced back in the 50s and 60s and was pro at pretty much everything. Enduro, flat track. He raced Daytona on the beach. He raced the track first year it was paved. And naturally, he got my dad into that growing up. And then my dad got out of that kind of when he was, 15, 16, somewhere in there. And then when I was growing up, I was, I think, 7. I got my first dirt bike, and that was a Honda XR50 back in 2003. And, from there, I just kind of progressed. I got in with a good club called Daytona Dirt Riders. And that was a really good group of folks. I was out in the woods with those guys almost every weekend. Made a bunch of good buddies growing up in racing. So I went, XR50, XR100, then, the 125s, the 250Fs. And then now I'm on a 450 is my main bike, and, ride some two-stroke and stuff still. But, I was with the club for about 10 years, and we hosted a bunch of local events. And I got super involved in that young. I wasn't big in the high school sports or anything like that, but I oversaw a lot of the section layouts. We had the Alligator Enduro. That was a big national event we had during Bike Week every year. And
what state?
What
state was that in? Was that Texas or somewhere else?
That was Florida, Daytona.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
With
yeah.
with a name like that, it was Alligator Enduro. Is that what it was?
Yeah, Alligator Enduro. And we
Cool.
had, all the top pro guys would come down for that. And we'd have David Knight come over from England and a bunch of guys from Canada and Puerto Rico and all that. So super involved in that growing up. And then from there, I started trying to promote my way through the sport just to make contacts, get sponsored riders, all that stuff you do, especially when you're a kid growing up. You want to not really feel like a big shot, but just kind of get more serious into the things you're passionate about, like going from a JV to a varsity team or something like that. But this is kind of the dirt bikes version of that. So, but I had a 2012 KTM 300 that was pretty decked out, and I had a buddy go, "Hey, you ought to try one of these Lectron things." And I was like, "Yeah, that's kind of cool, I guess." But I never heard of them. They were pretty expensive.
Yeah.
And this was back in 2014, so before Lectron had even hardly been conceived as far as a dirt bike application goes. And then I sent out a bunch of sponsorship requests for my next year of racing. And David here at Lectron happened to pick that up. And we started talking and, became pretty good friends. He has a background in landscaping. I do too. That's, how I made my money in high school. I started a landscaping business and or in college. So we kind of hit it off. And we kept up with each other all throughout when I was going to college. And when I graduated, I got a job in finance. And, he asked me, are you enjoying that? Kind of prodding at those little questions a little bit, kind of subtly. And I called back for a throttle cable back in 2016. And he goes, yeah, I've got one of those in stock, and I've also got a job out here if you want to come interview. So, I went from kind of a sponsored rider to got a job interview and started here in January 17. So, moving out here was a big change, but I'm getting back into riding again, getting back into racing, all that sort of thing. So it's been a lot of fun.
That's pretty funny. That's a cool story about calling for a throttle cable and ending up with a job. So
yeah,
I love it. I love it. So tell me, maybe you can give the listeners, and I may be putting this one up on YouTube too. Unfortunately, they only get to see my face. They don't get to see your chiseled physique. But can you give us, the viewers and the listeners, a kind of a brief history of Lectron as a carburetor manufacturing company? Because this is something that I get kind of questions about often, saying like, well, what is how did this carburetor get designed? And we know that Lectron has been around since 1974, so a lot longer than you or I have been paying attention to it. Can you give us a little bit of a history on how that evolved? Because you even mentioned here that 2014 was kind of like when Lectron started to break into the off-road / enduro dirt bike segment.
Yeah, so I'm going to let you guys in on a little bit of Lectron history that baffles a lot of people. Back when the folks that owned the company prior to Kevin and David, those were the Quantzes. Norm Quantz actually designed the whole technology behind the metering rod.
Okay.
So he created that, and then from there, kept producing carburetors for whatever market he'd go into. There was Porsche had some interest in those. I believe they actually ran them on some of their cars. Then Harley picked them up as a factory hop-up kit for, I'll say like the 78, 79 Sportster, somewhere around there.
Oh, cool.
But then they went more into street bikes and drag racing. That was the hot market back there. And back then, the chokes were more conveniently located on the right side of the carburetor. So people always ask us, why is our choke on that side? Well, that was the initial market that we were going into. And since then, you're talking up through 2014, we started getting our feet wet in dirt bikes. And that's really the first time that the chokes were kind of inconvenient. Still fully accessible, and you might pull those up once if it's really cold during the start of the day. So it hasn't been a priority to move it yet. We've offered other things to do that, but anyway, a little bit of history there for why the choke's on the other side. But as far as manufacturing goes, even back in the 70s, Lectron was fully American made. It's always been 100% cast in the U.S. All of our components are U.S. based, and we've got a few different components that go into the carburetor. Like, for example, we've got the bodies, and we've got the spigot side that goes into the engine, and we've got the bell side that goes to the airbox. Those are both cast in the U.S. The top cover's cast in the U.S. The bowl brackets are casted in the U.S. Actually, all that's done in New York. Then we've got a machine shop in New York that does all the preliminary machining for us. Then we've got another machine shop that does our billet components for us up there in New York also. Then we do the final fit, machining, assembly, and all that sort of thing in our location here in Texas. So if you call them with a custom application, we'll take a mostly stock carburetor, do the modifications here for fit, and then we'll send it out to you. But even our bowls are injection molded pretty much right down the street from us. So as far as manufacturing goes, it's about as American made as it gets today.
That's cool, and I'm glad that you shared that little tidbit with us. I just assumed that all of this was happening down there at the factory in Texas, so it's happening all over. That's pretty cool. Very good.
Yeah, all over, but all in the U.S. because you've got a lot of different components that go into it. We have the whole foundry that does the actual casting process in the mold, and that's a very, very complex business and takes a certain blessing from the EPA to be able to be in that business now. And then, a lot of different technical abilities there. Same thing with the machine shop. So we've got what we do really well here in-house, and the things that other people have more technical abilities with, we let them do it to help provide the best product that we can.
No, that's cool. So, and I love the background about the choke being on the opposite side. It's a story that either David or Kevin told me back in the day. But in order to move that over to the other side, to the left-hand side, it's an entire redesign of the carburetor, and that's just an incredible expense, right? And then maybe it has to be then approved again by, or how would that work if that was had to come to pass?
Yeah, so when you look at the carburetor, you see, okay, the choke's on the right side of it.
Uh-huh.
Let's move it on the left side of it. You look at it and go, oh, it's no big deal, but then you've got, all the tooling to tap it on the right side. You've got all the choke passages on the right side. You've got the actual tube that goes down into the float bowl, has a boss in the float bowl. It's on the right side. So you've got now the whole body's got to be changed. The float bowl's got to be changed. The float bowl bracket mold's got to be changed. All that sort of stuff's going on. So it'll be a huge revision of the carburetor before that happens. But, I can't go into any specifics here, but hopefully at some point in the future, you will see Lectron with the choke on the proper side, specifically for dirt bikes. But for now, we've got kind of a few different options there. We've got remote choke cables. We've had a choke lever that looks kind of like how some of the small flange-mounted Makunis have it. So we've got a few different things that make it a lot more convenient, but as far as actually implementing a move, that's a huge part or a huge deal.
Okay, cool. And I also do want to reiterate just what you said kind of there at the beginning, which is the only time that you need to choke these is at the first part of the day. And sometimes what I'll do is I'll reach in on the other side right over a pipe and just, pull that choke up. As soon as the bike starts, like I'm talking within 2 or 3 seconds of it running, I'll just put my choke back down because it'll generally run like that. And that's the only time I ever choke them. And I don't even have to choke them all the time. We're just talking about if it's really cold, So there are many days that I've gone out to my Lectron installed bikes and started them, even when the engine is room temperature without a choke. So it's a minor thing, but I agree with you. It isn't a major issue. So that's me just talking about it having on multiple applications. I think the hardest one for me to do is on my son's 65. So I've got one son with a Yamaha 65. It's easy to get in there. The KTM 65 is kind of hard to get your hand in there and get that choke up. But again, it's one time a day, So
yeah, and we've got that remote choke cable. We might have to send you one. You can let us know how that works for that situation. We've got some big things that we're working on for 2020.
Cool.
And we'll go into that I'm sure later. But as far as choke accessibility and all that sort of thing, the remote choke for now works very well. We've got, I think it's on an 8-inch lead or something, so you can run it all the way to the other side of the bike's frame. Cool. And pull it straight out if you need to. But again, a one-time deal. Most people really aren't that worried about to actually even spend $40 on a remote choke. So for us to make that whole move, it just doesn't make sense to us.
Right.
But anyway, we do have options for them.
Yeah, no. So without sharing the secret sauce, let's just kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about the technology of your carburetor and how it allows a dirt biker to ride their dirt bike essentially from sea level to 12,000 feet while it self-meters without a lot of tuning. Obviously, we mentioned, we covered that there is some tuning that might have to happen when you get the bike based on your application. But for the most part, once you get it dialed in, it meters and controls itself, in when we're talking about differences in elevation and differences in temperature, which is really density altitude. So what it's doing is it's metering or adjusting itself for density altitude. Let's talk a little bit about how that works for the lay person, because when I first heard about that, I thought it sounded too good to be real. So how does that work?
So it's actually pretty simple. Let's say, the example that we like to give a lot of times is you take a rock and you've got a quick moving stream, and you throw that rock in the stream. All of a sudden you've got an eddy behind it. You've got essentially a body of low pressure behind it, or if you're drafting behind a semi on a highway or something like that.
Turbulence,
you've got that spot of low pressure where everything's rushing around it. Well, let's say you choke that down a lot to where now the river is a lot narrower right around that. Well, now that low pressure spot gets to be a lot bigger, it's a lot more emphasized. Same thing with our metering rods. So you put that up against a vacuum that's 1,000 times stronger, we'll call it, than the signal behind a rock in a stream. You've got some serious lift behind it. And then, of course, the metering rod goes down through the bore into the pickup tube of the carburetor, and that goes straight to the float while it has fuel. So now the vacuum rushing around that metering rod creates such a strong signal that it actually pulls the fuel up the metering rod, fans it out, and kind of sprays into the motor. So you go, the whole fuel delivery is based off of the density of the air. You go up in elevation, the air's not as dense, it doesn't have as much lift. You go down in elevation, the air's better, it has more lift, it's going to kind of richen itself up like that.
Wow.
So same thing with humidity, temperature, any sort of barometric condition like that. It's really going to affect it like that. Now, obviously, you've got a set of parameters around that too. So, let's say you live at 12,000 feet, you put a super lean metering rod in your carburetor and you lean it out just to the ragged edge of lean at 12,000 feet or 10,000 feet. And you go down to sea level, your bike's going to be obviously too lean. So what we try to do and try to emphasize to our customers is what you need to do is get a good middle of the road tune where your bike's going to run really, really well. And then you'll be able to go through any normal elevation change, any normal temperature change, anything like that, any typical riding condition, and not make any adjustments. But like I was saying before, you go outside of those parameters, let's say you go into, negative 20 degrees up at 10,000 feet, and you put a snow bike track on your bike where you've got a ton of load on it. Well, that's outside of any realm of, feasibility for something to compensate like that. Fortunately, with ours, it's about as easy as a power jet adjustment. Reach down with a screwdriver and you're good to go. Maybe tweak the metering rod if you're doing some really serious deep stuff at low throttle, but usually you're not in those situations. So, you're talking about a 10-second to maybe 5-minute adjustment to get it to where you're going to actually have a very well-performing bike in those extreme conditions. So, again, what you're shooting for is just a good middle-of-the-road tune. And that's going to be different for everybody. Sea rider, they're going to have a different middle-of-the-road tune for how their bike wants to perform versus, a top GNCC racer. You put the top GNCC racer on a Sea Rider's bike, and chances are they're going to blow it up because the Sea Rider likes to be super crisp, super quick revving, all that sort of thing. The Pro Rider likes it to be super rich, super torquey, and be able to get that motor's lubrication that it needs under those extreme situations. So a lot of it depends on your bike, your application, your personal preference, but set it up, get it to where the bike runs well, and then anywhere you want to go, you're good within, a realm of feasibility.
Yeah, I like that. I like the whole middle of the road idea. It's funny because a lot of times I feel like I grew up reading magazines, and even just 5 years ago, you'd read articles in magazines and they'd be talking about how sensitive the two strokes are, and a lot of them were, these articles were based out of California, and they would say, we climbed about 1,200 feet and then our bikes weren't running quite as good. And I'm just sitting there going, there's something else wrong. I mean, these aren't that sensitive, especially if they're set up properly. Because I'll take, even if I have a bike that doesn't have, the fancy Lectron on it, I can gain a lot of elevation without my bike completely running like a dog. The nice part about having the Lectron on there is I feel like it runs crisp and clean at any elevation that I go to, whether that's 2,500 feet or 11,500 feet. They just have a consistency to them that is really unrivaled with any of the other carburetors that I have tested. And so they've been awesome, and I haven't installed Lectron on all my bikes because I sucker through them so fast a lot of times. But if I have one that I'm having a little bit of trouble with, where I can't quite tune it with jets or needles, then I have always gone to the Lectron, and they have always performed well for me. I haven't yet seen an application, a proper application of your carburetor where it didn't improve the overall performance. So that's been really awesome for me to notice over the last few years.
Yeah. You've got to consider, what is a manufacturer looking for when they choose a carburetor? They're looking for, what can we get cheap and will work usually well enough. So compare that to a top-of-the-line performance carburetor from a company that specifically sets out to go outperform every other carburetor on the market. We don't want to release a product that doesn't at least, eclipse the OEM carburetor in some way. It's pretty much always going to be fuel economy, and then it depends on, a lot of it's tuning and personal preference for where else you want the carburetor to outperform it. So we can make it to where it's going to outperform. It's going to do what you want it to do, where you feel the OEM carburetor is lacking. That's what we set out to when designing new products. So it's funny, we get a lot of questions. Well, I've got a DRZ 400. Is your carburetor better than, the stock carburetor in FCR or something along those lines? And, the answer is always yes, absolutely, because that's what we had that's what the target was on when we designed our carburetor. The Key and Air Striker, it's a very common carburetor that people like, that's a jetted carburetor. Well, guess what we had on our dyno we're running against? Guess what our field testers had on their bikes that we were going against? Yeah. We're not setting out there to be second best when we're charging for a top-of-the-line performance carburetor. So, that's something a lot of people have to take into consideration when they're considering carburetors is, one, why did the manufacturer go with it? And two, what are these people setting out to do? And obviously, we've got a market that is the typical high-performance, two-stroke, off-road guys that like, ease of use, fuel economy, and that sort of thing. Yeah. So, that's a lot of what we set out to do.
Yeah, no, that's great. So tell me, obviously this audience is all about dirt bikes. That if they're listening to this, they're into the enduro dirt bike segment. But can you tell us about some of the other, I know we talked about earlier Harleys and some different street bikes. Tell us about some of the other applications where the carbs are still being used currently. Are drag racers still using them? You've got a BMW right here as one of the pictures on your homepage. So you still selling a lot of carburetors to BMW, street bikes, Harleys, or are there even other applications like personal watercraft or something that I haven't covered?
Yeah, so the BMW that you're looking at, I believe that's done by a company out of Australia for a land speed bike. I'm not sure if it's an R100 or an R80 right now. It's not in front of me, but either way, it's a pretty sweet bike. Land speed is a discipline of motorcycle racing that a lot of people still use their products in. Drag racing, we're out there setting records pretty much every event. We actually have one group that set the fastest nitrous pro street bike carbureted record, and they put a set of our throttle bodies on there, and they reset the record for that. Wow. And now every time they go out, they're resetting that record again. So, we've got the drag racing, the BMW land speed stuff, the BMW street stuff works awesome. We're on competition hot saws that have 300cc dirt bike motors in them, usually running on alcohol or some crazy race gas. We do, paramotors. We do no personal watercrafts yet. That's actually a big market that a lot of people have been pushing me for lately. It's just a completely different style of carburetor. So we may see something down the line for that, but not just yet. Right now our most recent release was the new Gen 2 4-stroke carburetor. Okay. Or I should say not our newest release, but our newest line. And that's become very popular on like the XR650Ls and the Rs. The Harleys, they use a variation of the Gen 2 4-stroke carburetor. And, we're getting a lot more into the street applications that we kind of dabbled in the past a little bit, but now we're creating bolt-on kits specifically for those. So where we've had the technology in the past, now we've spent a lot of time refining it to make it easier on the user's end or the mechanic's end that might be installing it that's not familiar with our products, or however we want it to be, as simple as possible and as good out of the box as possible. So that's where we've been focusing some of our efforts the past couple of years.
Yeah, I like that. One of the things that I've noticed about the way that your business has evolved, at least just from my perspective as an outsider, is that when I first looked into electrons, I don't know what it was, 2015, I felt like I was confused on exactly what I would need. And now when you go to electron.com, the website has been updated and you're selling, kits. So the main thing is you've got 2-stroke kits, 4-stroke kits, and then you just select here on the website, it's electronfuelsystems.com. You just say, "Hey, I want a KTM, Husqvarna kit, and this is my year of bike." And it tells you, if you're on this model, you might need a like an intake manifold, an intake boot or something for this type of thing, or you're going to need this extra throttle cable that's a little bit longer, and we'll provide that. So the kits are there. It's made it a lot easier, and I think that at least from my perspective, that's been nice as a consumer to see, hey, they've got this figured out. They know what I need, and it's right here sold as a kit, because it isn't most of the time. It isn't just the carburetor you need. You will need most of the time a little bit longer throttle cable, and you might need a different air box or a different air boot on some of the models. A lot of them don't need that, but almost everything needs the little bit longer throttle cable. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. So mostly the 2017 and up KTM's are the ones that the kits get a little bit busy with. You need a domino throttle, the cable, the carburetor, of course. We have an adapter cam so you can run your stock ODI grips if you want to. And then there are a couple models that do need a shorter intake flange.
Yeah.
But again, it's as simple as you said. The website, that's actually been, kind of my baby. I saw all that stuff up. I know nothing about Lectrons, but everyone's talking about them. I want one. How do I get it without being scared away? So
Yeah.
click on the kit, buy the kit. You've got everything you need in your hands. Super easy to install. Usually you need, a Phillips screwdriver and an 8 millimeter socket, and that's about it. So, we're trying to make it as easy as possible now.
Yeah, I love it. And then even this year, so little history, I guess maybe for some of the listeners. A couple of years ago, the carburetors for, say, a modern KTM or a modern like a YZ250 or something like that, the carburetors were a 36 millimeter carburetor. And then here in the last couple of years, it was updated, and you started pushing everything towards the 38 millimeter high velocity. And then this year, specifically kind of in 2019, that has been retooled and refined down to the H series carburetors. So just in a short amount of time, there's been a number of little tweaks and little refinements there. Can you tell us a little bit about how the testing the testing process goes and how you improve these products? You talked about having test bikes down there. Are the bikes being dynoed? What sorts of like flow testing is being done? Just maybe enlighten us on how these new products and refinements come to pass.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So, like me, you got started off with Lectron early into when they first started getting into dirt bikes. And at that point, you had the option. You could buy a 36 millimeter carburetor or 38, depending on what you wanted to do. So, all of our carburetors operate off of Venturi. So you've got basically an hourglass tip on its side. You've got an open point, a tapered down point, and another open point on there. And all of our standard carburetors were, say 36, with 36 on the engine side, 34 in the center, 36 on the air filter side. So you had a 2 millimeter taper. Same thing with a 38, 38, 36, 38, same deal. Well, we had guys that had 36s and wanted a little bit more top end. We had guys that had 38s and wanted a little bit more bottom and mid. So we took the customer's feedback and went, how can we make this happen? And we put the carburetor on a flow bench, or both of those carburetors on a flow bench, both of them on the dyno, looked to see how they overlaid on, several bikes, 150s, or I guess back then, it would have been a 150 or a 144, one of the two. 125s, 250s, 300s, all different transmissions. We wanted to see what was going to be affected as far as the performance on the dyno goes. Then the field testing, our own, with our own rideability, how we liked it. And then we wanted to get it out to some of our beta testers, which would have been me back in the day, to see kind of what the feedback was on that. And try a couple different metering rods, a couple different tunes. And as we get, 10 or 15 of those out there, we could gauge kind of what the audience thought of that. And again, it came back with 36 millimeter carburetor owners wanted more top, 38 millimeter owners wanted more bottom and mid. So we took that, going back to that hourglass on its side type visual, instead of going from 38 to 36 in the center of where the metering rod is, and then back to 38, we put the high velocity insert into it, and went from about 36.5 millimeters on the engine side, because you've got to count for the insert, to 34 at the slide, to 38 at the airbox. And that worked really well to kind of bridge the gap for the time being. And then, we got some more feedback, guys going, that worked, but I want more hit yet. And, the guys are saying the top end rips, it screams, it's awesome. So we went back to the drawing board and thought, okay, what can we do there? So we decided to bore out. And when I say bore out, it's not as simple as throwing a carburetor body on a lathe. So I don't want anybody with a 36 millimeter Lectron to go to their, local machine shop and try this, because it's very, very specific in how you do it. But anyway, we took existing carburetors, modified them into what was going to be our sample or our prototype, created new inserts, flowed them, and we've got flow benches to where we can actually test the pickup at the meter and rod in the float bowl, see how much vacuum it's drawing, how we can angle the vacuum, taper the carburetor, do it all different ways. And what we ended up with was, going from the 36 and 38 to the 38 HV. That was kind of the bridging of the gap that worked very, very well, to taking our customers' thoughts and concerns and turning that into the 38H series. And, it went from the 2 millimeters of taper with the standard carburetors to the 2.5 with the 38 HV, to now it's a full 4 millimeters of taper, and it's a pre-molded bore. So these are off a completely new mold. They work just outstandingly better for bottom end performance. And the way that is the bore goes 38, true 38 on the engine side, true 34 at the slide, true 38 on the airbox. So that added about 60% of the taper to the bore, threw that back on the dyno, got that out to a bunch of our beta testers. And this was as early as November of 18. The official launch date for the 38H series was August 1st of 19. So a ton of testing went into this, a ton of feedback, a ton of refinements, and a ton of dyno testing, going back to the drawing board, finding new meter and rod settings, finding, if we want to alter the power gen at all, how it affected the bikes in, winter of last year, how it affected them as the seasons changed, if it actually needed to be adjusted for the extra vacuum that it had, how, if we needed to refine it at all, if they had enough hit, too much hit, and what we could do to make that match what our consumers were saying. Because, let's say I go put it on a bike and I have my specific riding style, my specific tune, and I go, man, this is the best thing ever. Then we get a couple of those out there, and our testers say, hey, it's not really on the mark that we want. Well, we've got to go align our efforts to make it work for them too, and really take that into consideration. So my role here, if you call Lectron, I'm probably going to be the person that picks up, or one of them. It's myself, Kevin, David, and we have a few more sales reps that just started recently. They'll help with tech support too, but we take all the feedback that we get and see if we need to modify our product to suit their needs. So it goes from listening to the customers with the initial product, doing some new dyno testing, field testing, flow testing, all that sort of thing, listening to our customers our testers' long-term feedback, and seeing if we need to modify it yet again before we actually bring it to a full market like we did with the H Series launch. So there's a lot of work that goes into it, a ton of different variables, and it's a very long-term deal. So going back to why it's a choke on the right side, it's one of those things where it's a process. It's not only very expensive, it's also very time-consuming, and we have a lot of long-term testing we have to do before we release anything to the public. So that's kind of our procedure. A kind of a funny example of it not going exactly to plan with our customers' feedback is our throttle cables. We had our first ones out there that had a 90-degree bend that came out of the carburetor, and I think the adjuster was up by the handlebar. Well, everybody hated the 90-degree bend, so we took that out. Then we just had the adjuster to the handlebar. Everybody hated that, so we moved it to the carburetor. Well, everybody hated the carburetor, so we took it out. Well, then everybody complained that we didn't have an adjuster, so we brought it back. So you've got to come up with a product, listen to the customer feedback that's good, modify it accordingly, and then make sure that it's going to suit the vast majority of people, and offer more lines if we need to, or less if it makes it too confusing. So, the cable with our adjuster where we have it now is kind of the best of both worlds. The 38H series is the best of both worlds. And frankly, the H series is so good that it outflows, or it has more lift at lower throttle positions and lower RPMs than, say, a 36, and it revs out better than a standard 38 does. So, we've been able to improve our technology in such a way that now you truly have the best of both worlds. There's not anything else out there that's going to flow more on your bike than, not so much than our carburetor can do, because we do offer 40s, 44s, and, up to even a 60 millimeter carburetor for drag racing, but in a way that the engine can actually use it. So That's kind of a long story, but anyway, it's a very long process.
No, I love it. I think that's super interesting. I know the viewers are going to find that interesting because I was just eating that up. I love the fact that there's a lot of testing going into this. Some of it is on a bench, some of it is on a dyno, some of it is, and then there's a ton of real world application because, something that a lot of people don't understand is it isn't always just throw more power at it, because there's a balance there to be obtained. And so what you're trying to do is make a carburetor that works for a wide range of people, and it works well in so many different situations. And the only way to do that is with testing and refinement. And I love that. Now you've got 60% more taper on the bore, to a full 4 millimeters of taper on that carburetor. And it almost sounds like that the 38 high velocity was kind of the stopgap in between the old standby 36 and what you have now with the 38H series. I just love to hear kind of the history of all of that. So thank you for that. Something else?
It's constant refinement. We're not going to stop because we have a good enough product. I'm sure a lot of people have, iPhones. They don't just stop at the iPhone 4 because it's really good.
Yeah.
They're going to keep improving it, refining it, and making it better. So that's all that we're doing through our whole process is what can we do to make it better? And, the going to the 38 HV was the next step up. Going to the H series is the next step up. And now, at some point, I don't know when yet, but eventually we'll have a next step up from there.
Cool. And then right now, as of October, when this podcast is being recorded, all of the carburetors that are coming out for your main kits, they're all going to be a 38H series, right?
So all of the 125, 150, 250, 300, and the older KTM 380 kits will all be the 38H series.
Okay.
But the H series is only available in that 38 millimeter size.
Okay.
We may decide to create more bores with that same taper and that same design down the road. But for right now, it's the 38 series only fits those models.
Cool. So maybe you can, and we've kind of covered this a little bit, but in your words, what do you think the main benefits are for installing, say, if somebody's got like a 2015 KTM or a 2019 Husqvarna, or even, what are kind of your selling points? Is these are the main benefits you're going to get by putting our carburetor on your bike? What's the main benefit for a dirt bike rider? We've kind of covered them, but if you had to do it in just like 2 or 3 sentences, paragraph, what are those benefits?
Yeah, so it's all subjective. It all depends on what you're looking for. We've got pro motocross guys that run gas at $80 a gallon, and for them, it's going to be a lot of the fuel savings. It's also going to be the over-rep for those guys. For me, I would say that you get more time riding and less time doing maintenance. For example, I hate cleaning air filters. If somebody said that, hey, Brooks, for $450, you never have to clean another air filter again after you get our machine set up, I would do that in a heartbeat, because now I don't have to get up as early and go clean my air filters or go oil them the day I'm going to go ride or stay up the night before. I just go do it. So in my opinion, the main benefit of our carburetor is you just get to go ride more.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get better fuel economy, better throttle response, a more linear power curve, more over-rev, more usable power, all those sort of benefits. But at the end of the day, you get to go ride more.
Yeah. No, I love that. It was funny because you almost had me going that this was going to make it so I didn't have to clean my air filters anymore. Something something with your technology. No, it's funny because I was talking to a guy yesterday. He calls me up and he's like, "Hey, talk to me about this Lectron thing." He's kind of looking at him on my website. And I don't want to just give a blanket response and be like, "Yes, you should buy this," every time. I want to have the conversation with the customer. And he said he's got his bike, it's okay, and he rides quite often. He says, but he's rejetting a little bit here and there. And I called him up to ask him what he meant by he's rejetting a little bit here and there. And he rides in two different locations. And so when he goes to this other location, he has to rejet his bike. And I said, well, how often does that happen? And he said, every other week. And I laughed.
Ooh.
And I'm going, yes, you are the perfect candidate for Lectron, because I get that you've got this jetting thing down so that you can kind of lean out your bike or enriching your bike in maybe 10 minutes or whatever. But if you're doing this every other week, let's get rid of that. Let's put the Lectron on there. It's going to run cleaner. And then just like you said, it's just less time of you working on the bike. You enjoy riding more because you're not out there dinking around with jets, and then you don't forget one time. And so the bike is running doggy or something when you go out on that trip. And that's another thing I talk to guys, if you're coming across the country or something and riding in a completely different locale than what you're used to riding, the Lectron is that it's like insurance on your trip is the way that I see it, because that bike is going to run at this new location far better than it would by you just guessing on some jetting. So let's talk about
Exactly. Yeah.
let's talk about two-stroke versus four-stroke. So I think that you sell probably a lot of two-stroke carburetors, but I kind of want to talk a little bit about the four-stroke applications. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about, do the four-stroke bikes get the same types of benefits as the two-strokes do? And maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So one thing you've got to consider is, we're in kind of a high-performance aftermarket industry. That's our main market. And that's kind of what the two-stroke bikes were originally intended for. And when you look at the bikes that compete with the two-strokes, you've got 250Fs, 450s, and that sort of thing. Well, you go back and you look at the market, and this is actually kind of eye-opening to me when I was updating our website, was, look at the KX450. It's a staple motocross bike now. Those are the guys that have the older bikes that would buy our product. Well, the KX450 came out in 2006, and it's fuel injected by 2009.
Yeah. So
there was a very small window on those bikes. But where our technology is really kicking off in those markets is with the dual sport guys. The DRZ 400s have been around forever.
Oh.
The XR 650Rs, the Ls, and even the KLRs. All of those bikes were very choked up from the factory. So, two strokes that had the high performance exhaust, quote unquote, high performance air boxes, all that. The four strokes didn't have that. So you take our carburetor, bolt it on, and you'll pick up a few horsepower with that carburetor. But you open up your air box and you put on a slip-on, you might be looking at 6 to 8 horsepower at the wheel that you've picked up, which in a lot of these bike cases is upwards of 20% for under, $1,000 or $1,100, and you include all those mods together. So the benefit is, as big, if not greater than on the two strokes. And the Harleys that already came more or less performance oriented. And I'm sure a lot of your dirt bike guys are going to laugh when I say Harley and performance. But, they've had good air filters on there. They've usually got pretty good pipes on there. But the stock carburetors are made for rideability. They're usually CV carburetors, constant velocity. And they've got usually really small fuel tanks on them. So they're looking for rideability and fuel economy. Well, our carburetor gives you rideability, more power, and fuel economy. So it's a complete update. And on those, same kind of deal as the adventure bike and the dual sports. You're picking up 15, 18, 20% horsepower just by bolting on our product. So it's just a massive improvement. And, like the carbureted dual sport bikes, the Harleys have been around forever. And a lot of them weren't fuel injected until 2006, 2007. So you've got literally millions of them on the road still. So we focused a lot of our efforts on creating the easy to install, easy to tune, just simple Harley carburetor kits. Just like we did with the off-road side, we had all the custom stuff available 20 years ago. But now we're doing the user-friendly bolt-on stuff, and that's where it's really kicking off. And we're seeing a lot of the gains in those bikes.
That's cool. So if my dad hadn't sold his 81 lowrider, we'd be looking to put an Lectron on that bike. That dang guy, he sold that thing too early. Now his only Harley is like an '07 Deuce, and it's fuel injected, so can't put Lectron on that one. Let's talk a little bit about let's talk about the metering rods, because this is one of the areas that I think you guys are always doing constant testing and trying to refine the metering rods, because it helps. That's where the fuel is being lifted up and then going into that. Obviously, it comes up into the Venturi, and then the fuel is atomized there as it enters into the motor. Seems like if I've got Lectron carburetor and let's say this year I purchase, or last year I purchased a 38 millimeter carburetor, and it was for a KTM. And then next year I switch over to a Beta. There's probably a really good chance that I can just get a different metering rod, and then get the baseline adjustment for that metering rod, put it in my slide, and it will work. Is that the case?
Yeah. So you can really break carburetors into a few different categories. The 125s to 200s all usually take a 5-1 rod. The 250s and 300s usually take a 4.2M or a 4.2 rod, and we've got alternates for those. And 500s usually take a 5.2 or 6.2 rod. So when you're looking across the spectrum for the 125s to 300s, you're going to use a 38H series carburetor, and either usually a 5.1 or a 4.2M rod. So yeah, a lot of the carburetors will swap across platforms, but then again, we've got the bikes that are model specific, like the YZ250s, the YZ125s, the RMs, that sort of deal. So a lot of the European bikes, yeah, you can swap them across. Shercos are the exception to that, because they're very, very tight and they take a custom carburetor. But let's say you have your son that wants to ride a YZ125, and you have a YZ250, and he's ranting and raving about the carburetor, and you're not sure if you want one for your bike yet. Well, yeah, you can pick up a new slide and rod and put it on your bike and test it, and hopefully get hooked and purchase one yourself. So, there are different categories that are obviously not compatible, but a lot of times you can't swap them across bikes.
That's cool. I love that. So, one of the questions that I get often, and I'm really interested to kind of hear what your take is on this, is with KTM moving towards this their TPI technology on their two-strokes. Now here in 2020, they sell very few bikes that are carbureted anymore. So what does that do for your company? Because I know the KTM bikes are a big part of your sales. We've maybe already covered a little bit of it, because you're still selling carburetors to Harleys and KX500s and CR500s that aren't even in production anymore. But what is this move to EFI technology? What is your company doing to combat that, or plans for that thing? And what's your view on this?
It's one of those deals where I still get calls every day of people going, "Hey, I just heard about your carburetor for the first time. What does it do? Can you tell me about it?" Guys that heard about technology and haven't had 5 minutes to look up a YouTube video or anything yet. I mean, it's brand new, fresh in their minds. Maybe they saw an ad or something like that, but there's still a huge market base out there that does not know who Lectron is or what we do, or have, heard through the grapevine what we do, but they're not prominent enough in their area yet to actually go pull the trigger. So there's still a huge market of carbureted two-stroke bikes out there, even though a lot of the new sales are going TPI. You still got the YZ250 that I can't remember exactly what their sales numbers are, but it's way higher than anybody would expect for their new bikes. Same thing with Beta. We got to talk to the Beta guys a lot when we were at the AIM Expo. And it's one of those deals where they're kind of holding off on going to the fuel injection as long as possible, in, thinking that there may be some event that takes place that pushes out the Euro 4 or 5 or whatever the new emission standards are, that has everybody going to the fuel injected stuff, because that's a huge cost for tooling for those guys too. So if they can avoid it, they're going to try to avoid it as best as possible. So we're not holding on hope that two strokes stop advancing, because obviously that would be, terrible. That could, completely end that market. We want to see the technology progress, and we will have products for that when it happens. So, you look at the TPI bikes, and they've got room for improvement in a lot of cases, and especially on the aftermarket support side. When they first came out, it was, you're going to run our pipe, our cylinder head, all of our own stuff, our mapping, our ECU. And now you've got, a couple companies that have their own ECUs out for those bikes, companies that are doing TPI compatible heads, TPI compatible pipes, all that sort of deal. So, having a throttle body for that's just the next step in two-stroke technology. But at the same time, we're not in any rush to get into that because, pretty soon I'd imagine KTM's going to do the same thing that we did. Listen to our consumers with the, early generations, see what they can do to refine it, and then probably have a whole redesigned model in a few years. So we're kind of waiting for that too because there's so little, feedback on the TPI stuff. If you want a successful business, you want to solve a problem, or ideally solve a problem that people don't know exists yet or that they have yet. So, we've got to listen to the market first and see what the TPI bikes are doing because, as a fuel systems company, what doesn't use fuel these days? You've got about 3 or 4 different cars, and every other mode of transport uses a fuel system. So, who's to say that our next market's not going to be fuel-injected Harleys or airplanes? It could be anything in between. We're on competition chainsaws right now. So, what it means for our company is very little right now. In 2 or 3 years, it may mean a little bit more. But at the same time, we have all these other product lines that are expanding very, very quickly. We've got all these other opportunities with other new products and other arenas that are coming out. Side-by-sides, for example, are a huge market that's becoming very performance-oriented. We've been on those before in the past, and our products work excellent. And a lot of those use motors that are very similar to some of the drag bikes that we're on now. So we have just a huge realm of opportunity ahead of us. And the TPI or the KTM's going to TPI is not something that we're super concerned about.
That's interesting. Did I hear you say you're on competition chainsaws?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, I think I mentioned it earlier a little bit, but anybody that was watching Red Bull Straight Rhythm, I think they had an intermission there where there was a guy with a 340cc two-stroke chainsaw. And what they do is they'll have these lumberjack competitions where they've got to cut a big old log like 3 times. Yeah. And it's the time that they run for that. So we're on a few of those. They're running either like MR12, which is the nastiest race gas you can put in something, or we're on alcohol applications for those. And then we're also big into the go-karts too. So
wow,
all these super high-end performance things that run these crazy exotic fuels. There's no support for it apart from us hardly. So yeah, lots of crazy stuff going on.
That's cool. So just an unrelated topic, and I didn't warn you on this one, but you just kind of brought it up in my mind. What do you think about electric bikes? Obviously, Lectron fuel systems. I think I know what your opinion. But do you think this is a real thing or just a fad? This whole idea of electric.
Oh, I love them.
You love them. So what do you think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So look at the kids that are living in fairly urban environments. I was one of them growing up, and I had a little XR50 that was a very quiet bike, but I could ride it around my front yard until I got dizzy. You have a lot of people that aren't as fortunate to have that much. I'm not going to say property because it was a small lot, but still, it helps get kids on bikes without having to go as far or putting that pressure on their parents. So in the youth market, I think it's excellent. In the adult market, I think you've got 10 years before it's very prominent, at least 5. You've got a lot of technological hurdles to go over, a lot of safety hurdles, and a lot of implementation costs, like going back to Beta or Sherco. Sherco's been very public about it, and going to fuel injection. It's very, very expensive to do that. So for a company to completely retool to go to an electric platform to that extent, look at Tesla. They're completely just going for it. It take a lot to see a dirt bike company fully pivot to embrace the electric roles. So, again, 5 to 10 years, we might see some of the adult bikes come out, but in the very near future, year, 18 months, 2 years, I think it's great for the youth.
Cool. Anything else we should have covered? Anything else you wanna enlighten us on here?
Let me see. I think we've covered just about everything we can think of. So, I'm all set on this end. If you've got any more questions, I'd be happy to answer those. Or if any of your listeners do, I'm sure you can message Kyle or message me on our Facebook page through Lectron.
How's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
Really, our social media is great. We've been making a big effort to make that a big part of our marketing platform, have equipped people to answer the majority of the questions. Obviously, if you've got a very technical support question, email that to us. But as far as what products we have coming out, what we think about, this or that or anything, we can respond to you very promptly through our social media. So we're Lectron Fuel Systems on Facebook and at Lectron Fuel Systems on Instagram.
Cool. Very good. Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I took a bunch of notes here that I'll have down in the show notes and everything. I just want to thank you for taking some time. And it's been a fantastic product. I started using it several years ago and then just started selling it as a dealer here on my website on dirtbikechannel.com. And I take these orders and then I send them over to Lectron. They are essentially then just, made to order and drop shipped straight to customers. I've sold, a significant number for me. I'm obviously not maybe one of your biggest dealers. I have no idea. But the whole point of that is I've sold a lot of these carburetors, and the amount of customer service that I've had to do on the back end is almost nothing. And the reason why that is because it's a good product. I sell other things, even t-shirts. I have more problems with t-shirts than I do with this complex carburetor. You know what I mean? So here's this 400, 500, this item, and I have far less problems with that than I do a t-shirt. And I think that's a testament to the fact that it's a quality product, it's made well, it's designed well, it's tested, and then it goes out to the consumer and it is ready to rock. And I just think that's pretty awesome. So thank you for being part of that. And give our compliments to David and Kevin and everyone else on the team, because I think you're doing a great job. And this conversation has only, kind of solidified that for me to kind of hear what you've got, hear what the testing process is, and just get a little bit broader view of the company. So thanks for taking time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Kyle.
Okay. I'll cut you loose, and you have a wonderful day.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Brooks. Bye. So there you have it, guys. That was the actual interview here, boom, on my phone with Brooks Tomlin from Lectron Fuel Systems. So it was awesome to kind of get his background. He's been with the company just a short time, and he's been helping to elevate them and get their online presence better, which is awesome. Because if you used their website before, what you have now is a much better, much improved thing on there. So I will go like this and turn on our applause, because that is much improved. And I mean it. If you go to their website, it's very easy to order a product. If you want to help support me, you can order these same Lectron carburetors on my website. It's dirtbikechannel.com. I then turn around and send that order over to Lectron, and it's drop shipped to you. The process usually takes about 2 weeks, sometimes 3 weeks, depending on how busy they are. So I do not stock these things. If you need a carburetor immediately, there are other dealers out there that stock them. So I'm not going to lie. I'm not the only person to get it from, but the carburetors are all the same price, I think, no matter what. The only benefit of you ordering it from me is then you're helping to support what I'm doing, helping to support this podcast, helping to support my family. And right now, if you do that before... if you order your carburetor before December 15th of 2019, it gives you a bunch of entries for the sweepstakes, which I'm doing for those 2 dirt bikes that I'm giving away. So you might buy Lectron and come around with the dirt bike. It's funny too, because one of the bikes that I'm giving away is my 2019 KTM 250XC, and I put Lectron on that bike because I wanted to make sure that the thing was going to run dynamite wherever in the country that it gets delivered to. And so I rode it for the first, I don't even know how many hours. I rode it for 20 or so hours And then I installed the Lectron on it, and I think I've only taken it for like one ride since I put the Lectron on it to make sure it's good to go. And it's going to go out to one of you guys out there. So that is what I have for you. Check out. Here's my end bumper music right here. If you can, sometimes I don't turn that up loud enough at the end so you can't really hear it, but I'm going to turn it up to right about there. Yeah. So this is my ending bumper music for today. If you like these podcasts, please let me know. Please do a review on iTunes, do a review on Spotify, give us a rating. It helps other people to find the podcast. Share them with other people. If you like these types of things to be up on YouTube, let me know down in the comments. It is a lot more work for me to put these podcasts up on YouTube. So I want to know if this is something that you guys like to see on YouTube. I know people are listening to them in the car and doing it in a lot of different places. So I've had some pretty good feedback on the podcast so far, but I need to continue to get that feedback and continue to get distribution out there for me to continue doing this. I like doing it. It's just kind of an experiment. So anyway, I really appreciate everything you guys are doing. Again, go over to dirtbikechannel.com right now to get entered to win those dirt bikes. And that's all I got for you guys.